What I'm about to share with you are 3 true stories, 3 people, 3 different blizzards, 3 encounters that defy explanation. By the end of this video, you'll question what's really out there when a storm hits, when visibility drops to 0, when you're completely alone, or at least you think you are. The first story comes from South Dakota, the second from upstate New York, and the third from the mountains of British Columbia. Each one will make you think twice about trusting strangers during a storm. Or worse, trusting what your eyes are telling you. Let's begin. I moved to South Dakota about 5 years ago. I need you to understand something right from the start. I'm not the kind of person who makes rash decisions. I'm methodical, maybe even boring. But that move? That was long overdue. My parents had been on my case for years about getting out of their house, and at 22 years old, I finally caved. I'm not exactly a social butterfly, never have been. The idea of living somewhere secluded actually appealed to me. When I found the house, tucked away in one of the snowier parts of South Dakota, where the nearest neighbor was a solid quarter-mile walk through open fields, I signed a lease that same week. For the most part, life was perfect. Solitude, peace. The first few years were uneventful in the best way possible. I kept to myself, went to work at the hardware store in town, came home, and didn't bother anyone. I never introduced myself to any of the neighbors, partly because I'm not that kind of person, and partly because there wasn't much reason to. The houses are so spread apart you could go weeks without seeing another soul. Everything changed one afternoon in early February. I remember the date exactly, February 8th. I was at work when the snow started coming down around noon. At first, nothing unusual, just another winter day in South Dakota. But within an hour, it had escalated into something else entirely. The wind picked up with this howling intensity that made the windows rattle. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Roads became death traps. My boss Rick, who'd lived in the area for 30 years, eventually told everyone to head home. There was this tension in his voice I'd never heard before. That's when I knew this storm was different. I drive a lifted Ford F-250, so I wasn't too worried. I've driven through plenty of bad weather before. Still, certain sections had me gripping the wheel tighter than usual. The visibility was so poor I almost missed my own driveway. By the time I pulled up to my house, my hands were shaking. Not from cold, from the sheer concentration it took to make it home alive. I was just relieved to be there, safe, or so I thought. When I went to unlock my front door, it was frozen solid. I stood there processing, then tried again. The key wouldn't budge. The metal was so cold it burned my fingers, even through my gloves. I tried breathing on it, cupping my hands around it, even banging on it out of frustration. Nothing worked. I walked back to my truck and sat there, engine running, heater blasting. I told myself I'd wait out the storm, but the snow only fell harder. After 10 minutes, I realized my mistake. My truck was already half buried. I tried to back out, but the tires just spun uselessly. I was stuck. I didn't have anyone to call. I didn't know my neighbors. My parents were 4 hours away. My only option was to walk to a neighboring house and ask for help. I hated the idea, showing up at some stranger's door like a refugee. But the alternative? Freezing to death in my truck when the gas ran out. The closest house was about a quarter-mile away. I could barely see it through the snow, just a vague dark shape in the whiteout. By the time I reached it, I was shivering uncontrollably. It was a tiny one-story house in rough shape, stained siding, a shutter hanging at an angle. But the lights were on. I knocked as loud as I could, waited. I was about to turn away when the door swung open, so violently I actually stepped back. The man standing there looked about 50, very nondescript face, thinning gray hair, pale blue eyes that seemed almost colorless. He stared at me without saying anything, just staring, like he was deciding something. Then he introduced himself as Joe and stepped aside. I should have felt relieved, but something felt off from the start. The house was warm. That's all I really cared about in the moment. The interior was sparse. Old furniture, bare walls, nothing that suggested anyone really lived there so much as existed there. He offered me a seat on a worn couch, and he sat across from me in a beat-up armchair. We made small talk, or at least I tried to. I asked how long he'd lived here, if he'd seen storms like this before. He answered, but his attention seemed somewhere else entirely. His eyes kept darting around the room, from me to the floor to the ceiling to somewhere over his shoulder, like he couldn't focus on any one thing for more than a few seconds. At first, I thought maybe he was just nervous about having a stranger in his house. That would be understandable. But the longer we sat there, the more unsettled I became. He couldn't focus on conversation either. He'd be mid-sentence, and then just trail off, staring at a spot on the wall like he was looking through it. His mouth would hang slightly open, and he'd stay like that for 10, sometimes 15 seconds before snapping back. "You okay?" I finally asked. "Fine," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Just tired. Long day." But it was only 6 o'clock. I decided I wanted as little interaction with this guy as possible. I told him I was exhausted and asked if I could just get some sleep. He seemed almost relieved and pointed to the couch. I asked if we could turn off the light, and he flicked it off without argument. But he didn't leave. He just stood there in the doorway for what felt like a full minute, not saying anything, not moving. I could feel him watching me in the darkness. I lay with my eyes half closed, trying to look like I was drifting off. Eventually, after this long, uncomfortable pause, he finally receded down the hallway. I heard a door close. I really did try to sleep. I was exhausted, and the couch was comfortable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd heard something. About an hour in, I actually did start hearing things. It took me a few seconds to realize the thumping and scraping sounds were coming from above me. At first, I told myself it was just snow shifting on the roof. That happens all the time in heavy storms. But these sounds were different. They had a rhythm to them, a deliberate quality. Thump, scrape, thump, scrape, like footsteps. That didn't make sense though. The house was one story. I'd seen that clearly. There was no upstairs floor for anyone to walk on, unless there was an attic. But why would someone be up there during a blizzard? I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation. The sounds continued for several minutes. Sometimes they'd stop for 30 seconds, and I'd think it was over. Then they'd start again. And then, without warning, there was a thump that was considerably louder than all the previous ones. So sudden and forceful that I shot upright on the couch, my heart hammering. And as soon as I sat up, I saw him. Joe was standing in the doorway again, not moving, not speaking, just standing there in the darkness, watching me. He must have been there for a while, because I hadn't heard him come back. I could barely make out his silhouette, but I could feel his eyes on me. My skin started feeling itchy all over. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could get a word out, he charged at me. I'm not talking about walking quickly. I'm talking about a full sprint. He literally jumped over the back of the couch and tackled me to the floor before I could even react. The next few seconds were pure chaos. We rolled around on the carpet, and I realized he was trying to put me in a chokehold. His arm was wrapped around my neck, squeezing. I couldn't breathe. He was stronger than he looked, wiry, but with this desperate, adrenaline-fueled strength. For a moment, I genuinely thought I wasn't going to be able to get him off. I kept resisting, thrashing, and he started yelling. Not words at first, just guttural screaming. Then actual words started coming through. Stop fighting. Just stop fighting. And then something that made my blood run cold. She's lonely. She needs company. She would find you good company. He kept referencing her like I was supposed to know what he was talking about. Like this was all perfectly reasonable. His voice was high-pitched and frantic, and there was this desperation that terrified me more than the actual violence. I wasn't thinking about any of that though. I was fighting for my life. I finally got my knee up and shoved him hard enough that his grip loosened. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed my coat, and ran for the front door. I didn't even put it on. I was too terrified. My hands were shaking, but I got the door open and stumbled out into the blizzard. Behind me, I heard him scream something. I'm pretty sure he said, She's not going to be happy. But I wasn't listening anymore. I ran. The storm had somehow gotten worse. The wind nearly knocked me over, and the snow was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. I didn't care. I just kept running, my boots breaking through the snow, my lungs burning, my entire body shaking from fear and adrenaline. I didn't stop until I reached the next house. I pounded on the door with both fists, screaming for help. The family who answered were normal people, a husband and wife in their 40s. They took one look at me and pulled me inside without asking questions. I slept on their couch that night, or tried to. Mostly, I just lay there staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I woke up to the wife, Kathy, making coffee. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, and I told them what happened. As soon as I described the house, the husband, Brandon, interrupted me. Was it Joe? I said yes, and he just nodded like he wasn't surprised. He told me Joe had been a problem in the area for years. Then he told me something that made my skin crawl. About a decade earlier, Joe's wife had disappeared, just vanished. There was never any official investigation because technically she was an adult and could leave if she wanted. Nothing was ever proven. But most people in the area suspected he killed her. The body was never found. I immediately connected the dots. She's lonely. She needs company. The sounds from the attic. The missing wife. I kept my mouth shut though. I still don't know why I didn't speak up right then. I did report my experience to the police later that day. Went to the station, talked to a detective, gave my full statement. They wrote everything down, said they'd look into it. But I don't think they ever did anything. No follow-up calls. No questions. Nothing. The scariest part is that I still live in the same house 3 years later. I never moved. Maybe I should have. But I didn't want to let that experience run me out of my own home. Nothing has happened since that night, but I'd be lying if I said I don't get a weird feeling every time I drive past Joe's house. It's still there, looking exactly the same. Weathered, isolated, wrong somehow. The one silver lining is that I got close with Brandon and Kathy. They became real friends. We have dinner sometimes, and they check on me during bad weather. But I always get a weird feeling when I go over there, because their house is right down the road from Joe's. And it reminds me of that night, of whatever god-awful thing he did to his wife. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling, I wonder if she's still up there. This happened last winter, during one of the worst blizzards I can remember. I'm 27 and live alone in a small rental house in upstate New York, about 40 minutes outside Albany. I work remotely in finance, which sounds fancier than it is. Mostly, I just sit at my desk and stare at spreadsheets all day, moving numbers around. The point is, I rarely have a reason to leave the house during the week. Some weeks, I don't leave at all. I know that probably sounds depressing, but honestly, I like it. I'm an introvert by nature, and the pandemic proved to me I could live like this indefinitely without losing my mind. Anyway, the local news had been hyping up this blizzard for days. You know how they get, every storm is potentially historic or life-threatening, until it dumps 3 inches and everyone moves on. But this one actually looked serious. Weather alerts were telling people to stay off the roads unless absolutely necessary. Stock up on essentials. All that doomsday preparation stuff. So I went grocery shopping that morning, frozen pizzas, bread, peanut butter, the bachelor essentials, and settled in for what I assumed would be a boring few days. The snow started mid-afternoon, and by around 8 p.m., I could barely see past my front porch. The world had turned into this swirling white void. I spent most of the evening on my couch, half watching TV and half listening to the wind howl outside. It's a specific kind of sound, wind during a blizzard. Not like a summer storm where it comes and goes in gusts. This was constant, like the house was inside a tunnel, and something enormous was being pushed through it. At around 10:30, I heard a new sound, kind of like a loud thud followed by this dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across wood. I figured a tree branch had come down. There are old oaks near my driveway, and with all that snow and wind, it wouldn't be surprising. I made a mental note to check in the morning and went back to my show. About 15 minutes later though, I heard a car horn. It wasn't a normal honk. It was weak and intermittent, almost like someone had tapped it by accident, or like a car alarm with a dying battery. I went to my front window and looked out. There was a vehicle stopped near the end of my driveway. I could see its headlights cutting through the snow, two bright cones barely penetrating the darkness. But that was it. Everything else was just white static. I stood there for a few minutes, waiting to see if anyone would get out, but I couldn't make out any movement. With the storm the way it was, I couldn't even tell what kind of car it was. My first thought was that someone had slid off the road. It happens out here, especially in weather like that. It sounds callous, but I wasn't about to trudge out into a blizzard to check on a stranger. Not when I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. I told myself if they were really in trouble, they'd honk again or come to the door. I went back to the couch and tried to focus on something else, but I couldn't stop thinking about those headlights. At around 11, I heard knocking at my front door. Not frantic pounding, just measured knocking. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. I didn't open the door. Not immediately. Instead, I walked over and called out asking who was there. A man's voice answered. It was muffled by the wind and the door, but I could make out the words. My car's stuck. I need to come inside to warm up and use a phone. His voice sounded strained, like he was out of breath. Part of me felt guilty. If this guy really had been walking through that storm, he probably was freezing. People die in weather like this. But another part of me, the part that watches too much true crime, still wasn't ready to just open my door to a stranger in the middle of the night during a blizzard when I was completely alone. Instead of opening the door fully, I cracked it, making sure to keep the security chain locked. The gap was maybe 3 inches wide. The man on my porch was covered in snow. Like, covered to a laughable extent. It was caked on his jacket, his shoulders, his hair, making him look like some kind of abominable snowman. He was shorter than me, maybe 5'7" or 5'8", and visibly shivering. Up close, I could see he was younger than his voice suggested, probably early 30s. Thin face with a few days of stubble. His eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from cold or something else, I couldn't tell. Please, he said, his breath coming out in white clouds. My phone died, and I've been walking for 20 minutes trying to find a house with lights on. Everyone else must have their power out. That made sense. Power outages are common during storms like this. I was just about to open the door. My hand was literally reaching for the chain when I noticed his boots. I don't know what made me look down. Maybe some subconscious survival instinct. But I did. And here's the thing. His boots were clean. Not just clean, but dry too. If this guy had really been walking through a blizzard for any length of time, his boots should have been caked with snow and ice. Hell, my boots get like that just walking to my car. But his were pristine, like he'd just wiped them on a doormat. I felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. I'll call someone for you, I said, my voice suddenly flat. You can wait in your car. His expression changed. It was subtle, but I saw it. The shivering stopped for just a second. His eyes hardened. It would be better if you just let me in, he said, not asking anymore, telling. I'll call for help, I repeated. They'll come get you. Open the door. No. For a long moment, we just stared at each other through that 3-inch gap. I could see his jaw working, like he was grinding his teeth. Then he took a step back. Fine, he said. Thanks for nothing. I closed the door and locked it immediately. Deadbolt, chain, everything. Then I stood there with my hand on the knob, listening. I could hear him say something on the other side, but I was already walking to get my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The operator answered on the second ring, and I explained the situation, that there was a man at my door claiming to be stranded, that something felt wrong, that I wanted police to check it out. She told me to stay inside and keep all doors locked. Police were being dispatched, but she warned me response times might be delayed because of the weather. Multiple accidents, downed power lines, the usual storm chaos. While I was still on the line with her, I heard footsteps move from my porch to the side of my house, crunching through the snow, heading toward the back. He's moving around my house, I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. Stay away from windows and doors, she said. Officers are en route. I moved to a side window carefully, not wanting him to see me, and peeked out. The man was standing near the corner of my house, maybe 15 feet away. He wasn't moving toward the back anymore. He was just standing there, looking up at the windows, looking for me. Even through the snow, I could see his face. And there was no distress there, no desperation of someone who needed help. Just this cold, calculating expression as he scanned each window methodically. And then he saw me. Our eyes locked for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, something else entirely. A few minutes later, I heard banging on my back door. Not knocking, banging, like someone was trying to break through. The whole door was shaking in its frame, and I heard wood cracking. I grabbed the biggest knife from the kitchen, a 10-inch chef's knife, and retreated to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me and pushed my dresser in front of it. Then I stood a few feet back, knife raised, phone in my other hand, still connected to 911. The operator was talking, trying to keep me calm, but I couldn't focus on her words. I was listening to that banging, waiting for the moment when the door would give way. The banging stopped after maybe a minute. The sudden silence was almost worse. I don't know how long I stood there, knife clutched in my sweating hand, listening to my own heartbeat. It felt like hours, but was probably closer to 20 minutes. At some point, I heard the car horn again, the same weak one from earlier, but this time it was one long, continuous honk, like someone was slumped over the steering wheel. The police arrived shortly after. I heard their sirens cutting through the wind, saw red and blue lights reflecting off the snow. I've never been so relieved to hear sirens in my life. 2 officers came to my front door, and I let them in after they identified themselves. They searched my property, checked all doors and windows, looked for signs of forced entry. They found a vehicle partially buried in a snowbank about 100 yards down the road, further than where I'd seen the headlights. An older Honda Civic, dark blue, with New Jersey plates. But here's the thing, when they checked it, the engine was cold. Not warm like it would have been if someone had recently been driving it. Stone cold, like it had been sitting there for hours. The officers searched the area with flashlights, calling out, but didn't find anyone. They found footprints leading from my driveway around my house, but they said something that made my skin crawl. There are no footprints leading from the vehicle to your house. The snow between the car and my property was undisturbed, smooth, like no one had walked through it. The footprints around my house seemed to start at the edge of my driveway, like someone had gotten out of a different vehicle. But where did they go after the banging stopped? The police filed a report and told me to call if anything else happened. They drove by a few more times that night, but eventually had to respond to other calls. I didn't sleep, just sat in my living room with all the lights on and that knife on the coffee table. The next morning, after the storm had passed and the sun was out, I went outside to look around. The snow had stopped and everything was buried under at least 2 feet. The world looked clean and peaceful. Then I walked around to my bedroom window. There were muddy handprints on the glass, brown and smeary, with clear finger marks. Someone had been looking in, cupping their hands against the glass. Those handprints definitely hadn't been there when the police searched. I would have seen them. The officers would have seen them, which meant he came back after they left. Or he'd been hiding somewhere nearby and never left. I called the police again. They came back out, took pictures, dusted for prints. But they never found anything useful. A few days later, I found out from a neighbor that another house about half a mile away had been broken into during the storm. The homeowner wasn't there. They'd left before the storm to stay with family, so no one was hurt. But here's the strange part. Nothing was reported stolen. The police report said there were clear signs of forced entry through a basement window, and someone had definitely been inside. But they didn't take the TV, the laptop sitting on the kitchen table, the jewelry box in the bedroom. Nothing. Why would anyone break into a house during a blizzard and not steal anything? It's almost like whoever did it wasn't trying to rob the place. Like they were looking for something else, or someone else. I think about that a lot. About what would have happened if I'd opened my door, if I hadn't noticed his clean boots, if I'd been the kind of person who trusted strangers without question. I moved 3 months later. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Every time the wind picked up, I'd think about him standing outside my window. Every time I heard a car door close, I'd think about those clean boots and that cold smile. The police never caught anyone. The case went cold. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the next storm.